When Shaquille O'Neal walked into the Sunrise Market on Osceola Parkway in Kissimmee, Florida on a Wednesday evening in March of 2022, it was 7:43 p.m. and the store was in the specific register of a grocery store at the end of a weekday. The produce misted, the bakery case half empty, the overhead music turned down to the level where you feel it more than hear it. He was there for the things he always picked up himself when he was in town. A specific brand of sparkling water, a particular kind of hot sauce that he had never found adequately replicated online, and whatever looked good in the prepared food section, which tonight was a rotisserie chicken and a container of macaroni that was still warm enough to fog the lid. He was wearing a gray hoodie and basketball shorts, and the kind of slides that announce a man has made peace with his evening. He had a basket. He was not in a hurry. He moved through the store with the practiced invisibility of a very large person who has learned that the secret to not being recognized is to behave entirely like a man who expects not to be recognized, which is harder than it sounds, and which he had been working on for 30 years with mixed results. He was in the hot sauce aisle when he first saw the man at the customer service desk. He was maybe 38, medium height, a construction jacket, the kind with the reflective strips that had gone slightly dull with washing. He had a grocery bag in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. A list, handwritten, folded once. He was talking to the woman behind the desk in the low, careful voice of someone trying to hold a request together without it falling apart. The woman behind the desk had a name tag that said Patricia, manager. She was listening with the face of someone who has heard this before and has a policy that covers it. Shaq could not hear the conversation. He could read the shape of it. On the man's grocery list, visible when he set it on the counter, most of the items were in one handwriting, upright, slightly hurried, the handwriting of someone who writes lists efficiently. But near the top, one item had been crossed out in a different hand, rounder, more careful, different ink. On the man's jacket pocket, hanging by its clip, was a lanyard. Faded, a youth sports logo, barely legible at this distance, the name of a program Shaq couldn't quite read. The lanyard had the particular worn quality of something that has been on those keys for a long time and has been carried everywhere and has not been taken off. In the parking lot, visible through the front windows of the store, was a sedan. In the back passenger window, a small face, a girl, maybe 7, watching the store entrance. Not moving, not looking away. Shaq put the hot sauce in his basket and watched. He saw the manager say something, clearly, definitively, and gesture toward the line of people behind the man. He saw the man look at the line, then back at the manager, then nod once in the way that men nod when they have been given an answer they cannot argue with and do not know what to do with yet. He saw him pick up his bag and his list and walk toward the door. He went through the door and sat down on the bench near the cart return and put his face in his hands. The girl in the car did not look away. Shaq set his basket down in the aisle. He had been carrying something since 2019, not an errand, not a program, not a plan. A memory, his mother standing in a grocery store in Newark in 1981, counting change at the register, while a line waited behind her, and a store clerk watched her hands with an expression she had rearranged herself to ignore. He had been 9 years old. He had never forgotten her hands. Now here is the part nobody in that store understood yet. The man on the bench, Roy Daniels, 38 years old, construction worker, father of 1, 11 months into a life that had been rebuilt from the ground up after a loss that had taken the original architecture with it, had come to the Sunrise Market tonight to return a duplicate birthday toy his daughter had received from 2 different relatives, apply the store credit to his grocery total, and get home before Amara's bedtime. The toy was in the bag. The receipt was not. He hadn't known he'd need it. because he'd assumed the process was simpler than it was, because he was new to all of it, because his wife had been the one who handled the errands and the receipts and the systems, and he was still learning every one. He was $11, 40 short. He had been in the store for 42 minutes. Amara had been in the car, in her car seat, with the radio on, for all of them. Stay with us for the whole video, because what Shaq was about to learn in that parking lot, sitting on a bench next to a man with his face in his hands, is the reason this story ends with a woman finding out that the person she turned away in front of a line of people had already given her family the most important thing she could never pay back. Shaquille O'Neal understood, with the comprehensiveness that comes from having been a public figure since he was 19 and a person for 30 years before that, what grief looked like when it had been carried long enough to become something other than acute. He understood the weight of it differently than most people understood the weight of things, because the things he had lost had been lost publicly, and the things he had kept had been kept privately. And the distance between those two categories was something he guarded with considerable care. His mother, Lucille O'Neal, had died in June of 2017, and he had said what he said about it publicly, and had kept the rest of it in the place where the rest of it belonged, which was between him and the people who had known her, and the thin gold bracelet he wore on his left wrist every day without discussing it. She had been the person who taught him how to be in a room with someone who was hurting, not to fix it, not to manage it, but to be there at a volume that the hurting person could tolerate. People in pain don't need you to make it better, she had told him once. He was 23. A teammate had just lost a parent, and Shaq hadn't known what to do with his hands in the hospital waiting room. They need you to stay in the room. That's the whole thing. Staying in the room. He had stayed in a lot of rooms since then. His stepfather, Philip Harrison, had given him the other half. Not about grief, about action. Philip had a way of identifying the specific practical thing that needed doing in any situation, and doing it without ceremony. He did not deliberate. He assessed and moved. He had said to Shaq once, in a context Shaq no longer remembered, but the principle of which had outlasted the context, don't stand at the edge of someone's problem. Go stand inside it with them. That's the only place you can see it clearly enough to help. Shaq had picked up his basket. He had gone to the self-checkout and paid for his items. He had walked through the front door and sat down on the bench beside Roy Daniels, who had not looked up. He sat there for a moment. Then he said, "Hey." Roy looked up. He processed what he was seeing, which took a second longer than it might have otherwise, because a man in a gray hoodie and basketball slides sitting beside you on a bench outside a grocery store is not a person you expect to be the person it is. He looked at the hoodie. He looked at the size of the hands. He looked at the face. He said, "I'm sorry. Are you?" "Yeah," Shaq said. "Don't worry about it." He looked at the car, at the girl in the back window. "That your daughter?" Roy looked at the car. Something moved in his face. "Amara," he said. "She's 7. She's been watching that door the whole time I was in there." Roy was quiet. He looked at the list in his hand. He folded it once, the way you fold something when you need to do something with your hands. "She worries," he said. "She didn't used to. She worries now." Shaq looked at the list. He saw the crossed-out item near the top, the different handwriting. He did not ask about it. Not yet. "What happened in there?" he said. Roy told him. Not the whole thing at first, just the practical outline, the way people tell stories when they're not sure yet how much space they've been given. The toy, the duplicate, the store credit, the receipt he didn't have, the $11. 40. He told it simply. He did not perform the difficulty of it. "How long ago did you lose her?" Shaq said. Roy looked at him. 11 months, he said. He said it the way people say a specific number when the specificity is the whole point, when they have been counting. March 14th last year. Her name was Carmen. He said the name the way you say the name of someone who has not stopped being present. Shaq looked at the lanyard on his keys. You coach? He said. Roy looked down at his jacket pocket, at the lanyard he had forgotten he was carrying. I used to, he said. Youth basketball. 6 years. Stopped when she got sick. He paused. I kept meaning to go back. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. What program? Roy told him. Kissimmee Youth Athletics, the Thursday afternoon session at the Cole Recreation Center. 2014 to 2020. Shaq was quiet for a moment. He knew that gym. He had spoken there once in 2018 at an event the foundation had co-sponsored. He had shaken hands with coaches afterward. He tried to place the face in front of him against the memory of that afternoon and couldn't quite, but the lanyard was right. He remembered the lanyards. How many kids? He said. 31, Roy said. He said it without hesitation. People who coached children remembered the number. Over 6 years. Some of them for 2, 3 years running. You are going to have to wait just a little longer, because before you understand what happened next, before you understand what the lanyard and the number 31 and the name of that Thursday afternoon program meant for a woman inside the store who did not know she was part of this story. You need to know what Carmen used to say. She had said it first in 2014. When Roy came home from his first Thursday session frustrated because 3 of the kids hadn't shown up and one of the ones who had was barely paying attention, and he had driven 40 minutes round trip and wasn't sure the whole thing was worth the drive. Carmen had been making dinner. She had turned from the stove and looked at him and said, with the simple authority of someone who knew her husband completely, "You don't know who's watching. You just show up." She had turned back to the stove. She said it again in 2016, when the program almost got defunded. She said it again in 2018, when Roy was questioning whether any of it was landing. Every time. The same words. She was right every time. The bench outside the Sunrise Market was cold, and the parking lot lights had the amber quality of a Wednesday night going toward 8 p.m. And Roy Daniels was carrying 31 names and 11 months and $11.40 and a lanyard that still had the logo on it. And neither he nor anyone else on that bench knew yet what one of those 31 names was going to mean in the next 10 minutes. Patricia Odom had been the manager of the Sunrise Market for 7 years. She had not come to that role through ambition. She had come through survival, which is a different engine and produces a different kind of manager. She was 52. She had raised 2 children largely alone after her husband left in 2009, which was the year Devin was 3 and her daughter Kezia was 1, and she had worked across those years at 3 different retail jobs before landing at Sunrise Market, where the pay was consistent and the schedule was manageable, and the work was the kind that rewards competence with the simple reward of knowing that you did what you were supposed to do. Devin had been a difficult 14-year-old. She had done her best with him, and her best had not always been enough, and she had known it in the specific way that single parents know the things they cannot provide. Time, primarily, and the specific masculine presence that Devin had been looking for in places she could not follow. He had started getting into trouble in 2013. Not serious trouble, but the kind that accretes, the kind that if it continues for 2 more years has a different name. She had been frightened in a way she had not told anyone, because telling anyone would have made it more real than she could manage, while also working and keeping Kezia fed and managing the particular arithmetic of a single mother's week. In the spring of 2014, Devin had started going to a Thursday afternoon basketball program at the Cole Recreation Center. He had gone because a friend went. He had kept going because of a coach. She had not met the coach. She had only known that Devin came home on Thursday evenings with a different quality to his stillness, less like an animal that has been confined and more like a person who has been heard. The coach, Devin told her once, did not just run drills. He sat with kids after practice and talked to them. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He had said, Devin told her, that the distance between where you are and where you want to be is almost always shorter than it looks from the outside, but you have to be willing to show up for the measurement. Devin had gone to that program for 2 years. By 16, he was playing well enough to be noticed. By 18, he had a partial athletic scholarship to a college in Georgia that he had wanted to attend since he was 15. Patricia had thanked God, and the scholarship, and her own persistence. She had not known the name of the Thursday coach. On the Wednesday evening in March of 2022, she had been managing a line of 7 people when a man in a construction jacket had come to the desk without a receipt and asked her to make an exception, and she had said, clearly and not unkindly, that she could not. She had said it with the tone she used for things she believed were fair, which was the tone she had developed across 7 years of being the person who had to be fair to everyone in a line of 7 people at once. She had watched him walk toward the door. She had moved to the next customer. She had been doing this for 11 minutes when a very large man in a gray hoodie came back through the front entrance and asked to speak to her. She had looked up. The hoodie was the same one, but the man wearing it was. She stopped. She looked at the name tag she had given him, which was her awareness of him, which was the gray hoodie and the basketball slides and the basket with the sparkling water and the rotisserie chicken and the hot sauce. And then she looked at the face. And then she stood very still for approximately 3 seconds. He said, "I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to pay for something." She said, "Of course." She was already moving to the register. "Not for me," he said. "There was a man here a few minutes ago. Roy, he needed $11. 40. I want to cover the full grocery total, and I want to cover the return on the toy, receipt or no, and I want to give him whatever the store credit would have been in cash." He paused. "And I want to tell you something if you have 30 seconds. She looked at the line. She looked at her assistant, who was already moving to cover it. She said, "I have 30 seconds. He told her what Roy had told him in the parking lot. The 6 years, the Thursday program, the 31 kids. He did not tell her about Carmen. That was not his to tell. He told her about the program and the name of it, and the years and the lanyard still on the keys." Patricia Odom held very still. She said, "The Cole Recreation Center, Thursday afternoons. 2014 to 2020, Shaq said." She said Devin's name. She said it quietly, the way you say a name when you are asking a question you already know the answer to. "I don't know which kids," Shaq said. "He told me 31. That's all I know." Patricia looked at the front door. At the bench visible through the glass, where a man was sitting with a grocery bag and a lanyard on his keys and a girl watching from a car window. She said, "Give me a minute." She came out from behind the desk. She walked to the customer service office. She was inside for 4 minutes. She came out with an envelope. She walked through the front door. Shaq watched from inside the store. He watched Patricia Odom walk across the parking lot to the bench where Roy Daniels was sitting. He watched Roy look up. He watched the specific sequence of Roy's face as Patricia said what she was saying, the confusion first, and then the attention, and then the stillness that arrives when something lands in a place you didn't know was open. He watched Patricia hand Roy the envelope. He watched Roy hold it without opening it. He watched Patricia say something else, something shorter, 2 sentences, the kind that does not need elaboration, because the elaboration is in what came before it. Roy nodded. Patricia nodded. She stood there for a moment in the parking lot, with her hands in her apron pockets, and then she turned and walked back toward the store. She passed Shaq in the doorway. She looked at him. She said, "He coached Devin for 2 years." She said it the way people say the thing they have just understood, when the understanding is not a surprise exactly, but a confirmation of something they had always known without knowing what to confirm it against. Devin is why I still believe in this. She gestured, vaguely, at the store, at the parking lot, at the whole shape of the Wednesday evening. Devin is the reason I can do this job and know it's worth doing. I didn't know who gave that to me. She went back inside. Shaq turned back toward the parking lot. Roy had opened the envelope. He was looking at what was inside. Amara had gotten out of the car. She must have seen her father sit up, must have read something in the change of his posture, and was walking across the parking lot in her coat with her small shoes, purposeful, toward the bench. Roy looked up when he heard her coming. He opened his arm. She walked into it. She did not ask what was in the envelope. She was 7, and she understood, the way children understand things, that her father's arm around her was the information she had come for. Roy looked up at the store entrance, at Shaq, who was standing in the doorway with his grocery bag and his sparkling water and his rotisserie chicken and his hot sauce. He did not say anything. Neither did Shaq. There are things that do not need to cross the distance between a parking lot and a doorway to be understood. This was one of them. Shaq lifted one hand. Roy nodded once. Amara waved, because she was 7 and she waved at everyone. Shaq walked to his car. Now here is what the parking lot did not know yet. Inside the envelope Patricia had given Roy was the store credit for the toy, processed without the receipt, plus the $11.40 balance on his groceries, plus her personal number written on a card and a note in her handwriting that said, "If Devin ever told you anything about what those Thursdays meant, I would like to hear it. No obligation. Only if you want to." She had written it in the 4 minutes she was in the office, which is enough time to do a thing correctly if you have already been deciding to do it for longer than you know. Roy called the number 6 days later. They talked for 40 minutes. Devin got on the phone for the last 10. He remembered Roy. He said he remembered him specifically, the way he ran the end of practice conversations, the thing he used to say about the distance between where you are and where you want to be. He said, "You were the first adult outside my family who asked me what I wanted instead of what I was doing." Roy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I had a good teacher." He was talking about Carmen. Devin thought he was talking about coaching. Both things were true. A 7-year-old named Amara Daniels, who had been watching a store entrance from a car window for 42 minutes without looking away, walked across a parking lot in her coat when she saw her father's posture change, and put herself inside the arm that opened for her. Because she was 7, and she had learned in the last 11 months to read her father's body the way you read weather, for what was coming, and whether you needed to prepare. She did not need to prepare that night. A manager named Patricia Odom, who had set a policy clearly and fairly in front of a line of 7 people, and had gone back to the register, and had been doing her job for 11 more minutes, when a very large man in a gray hoodie came back through the door, wrote a note in 4 minutes in a back office that she had been deciding to write for 8 years, without knowing who to write it to. A man named Roy Daniels, who had coached 31 children on Thursday afternoons for 6 years, and had stopped when Carmen got sick, and had been meaning to go back and had not yet. Went home that night with his groceries and his daughter and an envelope, and a conversation that would take 6 days to make a phone call, and 40 minutes to complete, and a further 10 minutes to give Devin the chance to say the thing he had been carrying since he was 16 years old, and had not known where to put. Carmen had been right. You don't know who's watching. You just show up. Roy had shown up for 6 years. He had shown up on Thursday afternoons when the kids didn't, and when they did, and when the program almost got defunded, and when it was raining, and when it wasn't. He had shown up because Carmen asked him to, and then because he wanted to, and then because it was the kind of thing you do once you understand that the doing is the point, regardless of whether the result is visible from where you're standing. He hadn't known who was watching. Now, he did. And Shaquille O'Neal drove home with the window down, thinking about his mother in a grocery store in Newark in 1981, counting change at the register with a line behind her, and about a 9-year-old boy who had stood beside her and had not known what to do with what he was watching, and had spent the next 40 years learning. He was still learning. He thought he probably always would be. He thought that was probably the correct arrangement. His mother had said, "People in pain don't need you to make it better. They need you to stay in the room." He had stayed. He had sat on a bench in a parking lot in Kissimmee on a Wednesday evening and stayed in the room. That is the whole job. That is all it ever is. Drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you are watching this from tonight. If you have ever been the person counting change at a register with a line behind you, or the child standing beside them, or the coach who showed up when nobody seemed to be watching. We want to know where you are. The like button is right there, and every single one tells us to keep going. Subscribe and join a community that believes the person on the bench deserves someone to sit beside them. The next video is already there. We will see you there.